Jasmine Crockett takes down JD. Vance exposes his racist jab, live on air. They say history doesn't happen on live TV. They lied, because at exactly 8:32 p.m. Eastern, in a brightly lit studio with polished glass tables and powdered foreheads, Senator JD Vance leaned toward the microphone, looked a black congresswoman dead in the eye, and said the one word that still echoes through every hallway of American politics: you're just being ghetto. Not as a joke, not in passing, not slipped under breath. No. He said it like a man who thought the cameras were there to protect him, like someone who'd never been told watch your mouth by the right woman at the wrong moment. And that's when everything stopped. Not like a dramatic pause, like a rupture, the air gone, the host blinking in Morse code, the other panelists frozen like mannequins in a disaster drill. Even the sound guy reached for the fader and just hovered, because that wasn't a soundbite. It was a strike. The word didn't fall. It landed, heavy, cracked open a silence that even the studio lights seemed scared to touch. But Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't gasp. She didn't even raise an eyebrow. Instead, she did the thing they never expect. She looked into the camera, not at JD, not at the host, not even at the audience, and she delivered a line that didn't just clap back, it cut clean through time. You hear ghetto, I hear South Dallas. The way she said it, not loud, not dramatic, like a funeral prayer wrapped in fire, like she was unburying a truth that had been waiting just beneath the skin of America. And if you listened closely, really listened, you could hear it. Not the sound of outrage, not applause, but a million people across the country dropping their forks, their phones, their comfort zones. Because that word ghetto, it's not new. It's not even the insult that shocks us anymore. It's the ease. The way JD Vance said it like it was a seasoning, a flavor, a throwaway spice in a pot of policy debate. And that's why this wasn't just another panel. This wasn't just another episode of Politics as Sport. This was the moment a woman stared into the lens of America and said, I know what you think of women like me. I've always known. And guess what? I'm still standing. But let's rewind. Because before the word, before the cameras, before the chair and the mic and the firestorm, there was a woman, just one sitting silently, letting the white men talk themselves into a hole. JD had been posturing for 10 minutes straight, interrupting, dismissing, leaning so far into the mic you could smell the privilege through the screen. Let's be serious, he said, waving off real community investment like it was pocket lint, throwing money at bad schools and calling it reform. That's not progress. He smirked, like he expected laughter, like progress was something only he could define. And Jasmine, she waited, not because she didn't have words, but because she knew how this game worked. Let the arrogance speak first. Let the condescension wrap itself in calm, and then only then step in with a shovelful of truth. If by bad schools, she said, finally leaning forward, you mean underfunded, understaffed, and ignored by state governments, then sure, let's throw all the money at them. Because communities that have been robbed deserve repair. It wasn't fiery, it was surgical. She wasn't yelling, she was testifying. And that's when JD flinched, not outwardly, but something in his eyes narrowed, like the predator sensed the trap too late. Like he'd just realized the only adult in the room was the one he'd tried to belittle. So he said it, like a grenade dressed up as a joke, like a backhand slapped through the airwaves. You're just being ghetto. And Jasmine. She adjusted her mic, locked eyes with America, and began not a rebuttal, but a reckoning. I'm not surprised you said that. She didn't raise her voice. She raised gravity, because when black women speak with conviction, when we challenge power, we don't get to be assertive. We get labeled. Her voice didn't rise, but the temperature in every room watching that clip did. Because we've all heard that label, not just in studios and panels, but in break rooms, in staff meetings, in school pickup lines, whispered behind resumes and beneath emails. Ghetto, the code word for too black, too loud, too real. And yet, here was Jasmine, not just wearing the insult, but wielding it. She didn't just absorb the slap. She turned it into a sermon. You hear ghetto, she said again, voice steady, but I hear my mother, working 2 jobs, raising 3 kids, still showing up to PTA meetings with food stamps in her purse and dignity in her walk. And just like that, history shifted. Not because someone yelled, not because someone stormed off, but because a woman refused to shrink. Because the insult didn't silence her, it activated her. And through the screen, through the silence, through every passive host and nervous producer, America watched the rules change in real time. She didn't clap back, she climbed out, and took every woman who'd ever been called too much, too loud, too ghetto with her. JD Vance thought he was tossing a barb. He ended up lighting a match. And Jasmine Crockett. She didn't just stand in the fire. She named it. And then she told it to watch her burn brighter. She didn't just stand in the fire. She named it. And then she told it to watch her burn brighter. But fire doesn't start without a spark. And Jasmine Crockett. She'd been carrying the matchstick since childhood, because long before the camera panned to her face, long before the mic caught her voice like scripture, there was a little girl in South Dallas, a girl whose edges burned not from heat, but from judgment. You want to understand why she didn't flinch? You need to go back to the moment when ghetto wasn't a slur. It was a diagnosis. 4th grade, a substitute teacher, a worksheet that claimed Dr. Martin Luther King had finished the job, and a little girl who stood up just trying to say that maybe, just maybe, the work wasn't done. Well, aren't you a little firecracker, the teacher said, lips curled in amusement. Real ghetto fabulous. The words hit Jasmine harder than any pop quiz, not because she knew exactly what they meant, but because of how they were said, like admiration dipped in acid. She went home that day confused, told her mother over dinner, expected fire. Instead, she got iron. Marlene Crockett, house cleaner, PTA ninja, backbone of a household stitched together by grit, looked her daughter in the eye and said, "Next time finish your point and say it louder." She didn't say write a letter. She didn't say complain. She said own it, out loud. Because in South Dallas, silence isn't safety, it's surrender. And so Jasmine learned, not how to yell, but how to hold her breath until the room could hear her heartbeat. She sharpened her words like tools. Not weapons, tools. By high school, she wasn't the loud girl. She was the girl you called when someone got too comfortable lying in debate club. The girl who wore knockoff sneakers and still stood like they were Louboutins. She didn't come to impress. She came to correct. And by the time she made it to Prairie View A&M, professors knew her name not because she talked too much, but because when she did talk, people shut up and listened. That fire JD Vance saw across the table. It didn't come from outrage. It came from years of being told, you're too much, too fast, too black, too ghetto, and deciding every single time, too bad. So when JD threw that word out like trash on a hot mic, he wasn't insulting a woman. He was challenging a decades-long oath of survival. And Jasmine, she answered with the weight of memory. You think it's emotional, she said later, but I think it's lived experience. Because South Dallas didn't teach her to be angry. It taught her to listen until the silence cracked. It taught her that dignity is not a tone. It's a posture, a pause. And that's why she didn't explode. Because explosions are loud. She was louder than that. She was still. The truth is, she didn't learn poise from politics. She learned it from watching her mother walk into a Highland Park mansion, cleaning bleach burns off a marble counter, then coming home to press a daughter's skirt for a church play the next morning. That's what JD didn't see. He didn't see the late nights at a debate podium with no audience, practicing how to say you're wrong without ever using the words. He didn't see the college classrooms where she sat in the back, asking the questions professors conveniently skipped. He didn't see the public defender's office in Louisiana, where the AC groaned louder than the copy machine, and her briefcase carried more dismissed lives than law books. And he sure as hell didn't see the moment Jasmine got pulled over outside of Shreveport, still in her blazer, heels, and bar exam flashcards on the passenger seat, and the officer asked her, "Whose car is this? Not what's your name, not what do you do, but prove this doesn't belong to someone else." That moment, it's what she heard in JD's voice. Because ghetto isn't just a word, it's a shortcut. A way to skip past everything someone is and reduce them to what you're afraid they represent. And yet, despite that, she stayed calm. Because she wasn't talking to JD Vance, she was talking to us. She was talking to the women who've had to reread emails 3 times just to avoid sounding aggressive. To the girls who've had their resumes scrubbed of anything that might suggest pride in where they're from. To the mothers who've told their daughters, keep your voice calm no matter what they say, and hated themselves for having to say it. She was talking to them, to you, to the version of herself who once thought professional meant erasing every bit of South Dallas from her voice. And maybe, just maybe she was talking to the camera, too, the one that captured everything, the smirk, the slur, the silence, and the sacred response that followed. Because make no mistake, this wasn't just a comeback, it was a mirror, and JD Vance. He looked into it and blinked first. So yes, she burned brighter, but not because of rage. Because when the fire came for her, She'd already learned how to walk through it. She'd already learned how to walk through it. Because in South Dallas, the fire doesn't ask permission. It teaches. It tempers. It decides whether you get drowned in the noise or rise through the silence. And Jasmine Crockett, she chose to rise. So, when JD Vance tossed out ghetto like a grenade wrapped in a grin, he thought he was igniting something destructive. But what he didn't realize is that she'd been forged in worse. That insult, that wasn't the fire. That was just the flare and the explosion. It came next because what Jasmine said wasn't just a retort, it was a reveal. "You hear ghetto," she said again, voice calm but blade sharp. "I hear my mother, I hear South Dallas, I hear survival." And just like that, the room shifted, not with applause, but with awareness. Sudden, tense, real. The host tried to pivot. You could see it in the fake smile, in the quick shuffle of papers, in the subtle glance to producers behind the camera. He knew we all knew they'd just slipped from a panel into a reckoning. "Congresswoman Crockett," the host tried, clearing his throat. "Perhaps we can shift to student loans." She didn't interrupt. She didn't even move. She just turned her hands over, palms down on the table, fingers tapping a slow, percussive rhythm of restraint. Because here's the truth. She had more to say. So much more. About how being called ghetto doesn't stop when you win office. About how even after the campaigns, the courts, the credentials, the curls still get questioned. About how they smile while they strip you down in syllables loud. Unprofessional, too much. About how that one word weaponized in a sentence can collapse an entire identity into a caricature. But Jasmine knew what they expected. They wanted the explosion. They wanted volume. They wanted the angry black woman. And instead, she gave them silence sharp enough to draw blood. Across the country, the internet was already moving faster than the panel. The clip had been cut and posted before the segment ended. 30 seconds of holy combustion. "You hear ghetto. I hear South Dallas." And in that silence, people were standing. Not out of outrage, out of recognition. Women in HR departments sat back in their chairs, blinking through glass walls. Students in civics classes paused mid-lecture to watch it twice. A pastor in Cleveland rewrote his sermon for Sunday. A high school girl in Fresno opened her laptop and typed out the quote for her speech team application. No talking points, no campaign slogans. Just that line, that tone, that terrifying composure that said, "I've seen worse, and I remember every name you forgot." But in the studio, the performance tried to go on. JD leaned back, cracked his knuckles, glanced sideways like he was ready to move past it. He wasn't. Because every second he sat next to her, the room kept remembering, not his words, but her restraint. That's the thing about moments like this, they don't erupt. They infect. You could feel it behind the scenes. The assistant producers texting each other. The audio tech who suddenly realized he hadn't taken a breath since the line dropped. The makeup artist who avoided Jasmine's eyes as she reapplied powder during the break. Because everyone knew this wasn't a debate anymore. It was a dismantling of tone policing, of professional code switching, of every room that expected black women to show up clean, calm, and silent. And as Jasmine sat through the rest of the segment, still composed, fingers now resting on the table like punctuation marks, the audience shifted from observing to witnessing. And JD. He started to fumble. His next answer stumbled over buzzwords. His gestures grew wider, like he was trying to occupy more air. He said the word reform 6 times in 2 minutes. It didn't matter, because the room wasn't watching him anymore. They were studying her, not for how she reacted, but for how she refused to. Not for the fire in her words, but for the discipline that held them back. By the time the segment ended, the damage was done. To him. Not because she crushed him, but because he exposed himself. And when the host offered his final line, "Thank you all for a spirited discussion," it felt like the kind of lie you tell when the house is already on fire. They went to commercial. Everyone stood, except Jasmine. She sat for a moment longer, unclipped her mic slowly, looked at it, then set it down on the table perfectly still. That was the moment that went most viral. Not her words, not his insult, but the silence. The way she placed the mic like it had been the weapon all along, like she didn't need it anymore, because truth had already gone live. By the time she left the building, her name was trending in 5 cities. Within 2 hours, in 20, some posts called her a queen, some said she should have walked out. But the ones that mattered, they were quiet. One simply read, "I've never seen someone defend where they're from without apologizing for it." Another, "She just changed the rules of the room." And in that moment, between the insult and the aftershock, something rare happened. The country stopped debating and started listening. Because what Jasmine did wasn't about winning a fight. It was about rewriting what it means to show up. Unfiltered, unbent, unmoved, and JD Vance. He'll be remembered, but not for what he said, for what it revealed. He'll be remembered, but not for what he said, for what it revealed. Because moments like these don't just fade with the news cycle. They settle. They burrow under the surface of America's comfort zones, and they wait. Wait to be unpacked in classrooms, in barbershops, in whispered hallway conversations at work. Wait to rise again when someone says, "It wasn't that serious. He didn't mean it that way. You're overreacting." But this time, something different happened. The narrative didn't disappear. It multiplied. Clips kept spreading across social media platforms, into group chats, over dinner tables, and not just the 30-second soundbite. The whole thing, unedited, unmuted, because the people weren't hungry for outrage. They were starving for recognition. And Jasmine's voice, it fed something deeper than political loyalty. It fed the truth we're told to swallow quietly. That ghetto is never just a word. It's an eraser, a muzzle, a gate disguised as a slur. But this time, the gate didn't close. It swung wide, and everyone looked in. The backlash came fast. As expected, right-wing pundits flooded the airwaves. Commentators, one after another, began the spin. It's just a word. She's playing the race card. Maybe she's too sensitive for politics. One anchor even smirked and said, "The term ghetto has evolved. It's not what it used to mean. Evolved into what? Comfortable for the speaker, but corrosive to the spoken." That's when the shift happened. Not on the floor of Congress, but online, in real homes, in places no cable news producer could curate. Teachers paused lessons to play the clip. A civics instructor in Georgia asked students to write reflections. Half the girls quoted Jasmine's line about her mother, food stamps in her purse, dignity in her walk. A retired judge from Iowa posted on Facebook, "If you think she overreacted, you've never seen a courtroom where black women are expected to smile through being ignored." And then came the artists. A Grammy-winning singer tweeted, "Don't let anyone shame you out of where you come from. Crockett, we see you." An NBA player posted, "That wasn't a comeback. That was a clinic." But louder than all that were the women, thousands of them writing in her inbox. Mothers, students, social workers, corporate managers. Women who knew the taste of that word. Not because it was shouted, but because it was whispered across performance reviews, job interviews, and social invitations never sent. "You made me cry in the break room. You reminded me my voice isn't too much, it's just been too contained. My daughter saw you and asked if all lawyers are like you. I told her not yet." And through it all, Jasmine said, nothing. Not at first, because she didn't need to. But silence, as she'd learned, only protects those who think it can erase memory. So, after 3 days, she sat down, no lights, no team, just her webcam, a chipped mug, and a yellow notepad. And she began. "Before I say anything," she said, "I want to be clear. I wasn't going to respond. But your messages, your stories made this moment bigger than me. It wasn't a press conference. It was something more sacred. It felt like a kitchen table late at night, after the world's cracked open and you're deciding whether to cry or keep cooking." She didn't even say JD Vance's name. She didn't have to. "I've been called ghetto, unprofessional, angry. I used to think if I dressed right, if I softened my voice, if I got the degrees, won the elections, those words would stop chasing me." She paused. Her breath held the weight of 1,000 mothers who had told their daughters to smile smaller, speak gentler. But they don't stop. They just wear new suits. And then, the line, the one that spread not like wildfire, but like gospel. "I wasn't offended because I've never been ghetto. I was offended because I have, and I know what that word really means when you say it like that." Her voice didn't tremble. It carved. The video crossed 1 million views in under 2 hours. But that wasn't the point. The point was the text message from Clarice in Amarillo. No blue check, no profile photo. Just a photo of her 12-year-old daughter, standing at the dinner table, holding a printed copy of Jasmine's quote. She said she's going to use it for her school speech. "Thank you for saying it out loud." That was it. That was the moment Jasmine knew the insult had been transformed. Not erased, not avenged, rewritten, because it wasn't about ghetto anymore. It was about power, about who gets to define it, who gets to own their roots without apology, who gets to sit at the table without being asked to trade in their accent, their zip code, or their story. And if JD thought he could toss a word into the fire and walk away unscorched, He forgot one thing. This wasn't a flash, it was a fuse. And now, the whole system could hear the click. And now, the whole system could hear the click. Because that fuse lit in a television studio, sparked by one word, one stare, one unmoved voice, didn't just stop at trending tabs and viral stitches. It reached further, into boardrooms, into back rooms, into the quiet corridors of power where men like JD Vance assumed that language had no cost because the apology could always be implied. But this time, the burn didn't go away. It spread. Within 48 hours, JD's office was flooded not by calls from supporters, but by letters. Handwritten, typed, annotated in red ink and righteous fury. Letters from constituents, from professors, from retired principals, from a group of high school seniors in Toledo who published an op-ed in the Toledo Blade titled, "Why My Congressman Should Apologize to Jasmine Crockett." And they didn't mince words. We've grown up hearing that certain ways of speaking, dressing, or even walking are labeled ghetto. But no one ever tells us what that means. They just use it to make us feel small. JD Vance didn't respond. Instead, he tried to write it out. He skipped public appearances, declined interviews, posted a bland 3-line statement through a staffer's account. Senator Vance respects all his colleagues and regrets any misunderstanding. But America wasn't misunderstanding anything. They were remembering how quickly language becomes a blade in the wrong mouth, how easily a slur can be disguised as a shrug, and how silent strategic, performative, calculated silence is a kind of answer too. But what JD hadn't anticipated was who would break ranks. Because in a rare moment of bipartisan clarity, 2 of his own Republican colleagues issued separate statements without naming him directly. One referenced the importance of respectful public dialogue. The other condemned racially charged dismissive terminology in professional discourse. They didn't say his name. They didn't have to. The ice under his feet had begun to crack, not from political opponents, from within. And that was just the start. A university in Oregon quietly pulled out of a planned speaking engagement. A tech conference in Seattle removed him from its keynote lineup, citing community concerns. A major publishing sponsor backed out of his upcoming book tour. And all of this before anyone from Jasmine's team released a single press statement. Because she didn't need to push the story. The truth was doing just fine on its own. But even in the fallout, she remained silent, not absent-present, still showing up, still working, still speaking in hearings about housing and justice and education. And every time a reporter tried to corner her, "Do you have anything you'd like to say to Senator Vance?" she offered the same answer. "I already said it." And I said it the first time with clarity, no theatrics, no victory laps. Just facts that landed like bricks and stayed standing. And behind closed doors, the system began to sweat. Because when Jasmine Crockett didn't disappear, when she didn't implode under the weight of backlash or smear attempts, when she just kept showing up like she belonged there suddenly, the conversation shifted from, was she too much, to, why aren't we enough? And in that silence, the one she never broke with apology or performance, the reckoning deepened. Because this wasn't just a controversy. It was a mirror, one that forced America to confront how we police presence, how we weaponize tone, how we ask women like Jasmine to perform professionalism on a tightrope, then call it overreacting when they catch fire. And through it all, she never raised her voice. She didn't have to, because the country was already listening. In classrooms, in offices, in a gymnasium in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where she spoke to a group of high school girls 2 weeks after the incident. No press, no headlines, just metal folding chairs, basketballs echoing in the distance, the scent of floor wax and vending machine popcorn. She stood in front of them, not as Congresswoman Crockett, but as Jazz, the girl who grew up changing brake pads in the Texas sun, the girl who walked to school in too tight sneakers with ideas too big to fit inside them. And when one student near the back raised her hand and asked, "How did you not cuss him out?" the room erupted in laughter. But Jasmine just smiled. "Because I wasn't talking to him," she said. "I was talking to you." If I had exploded, they would have ignored what I said and focused on how I said it. So instead, I gave them words they couldn't ignore. That moment, quiet, unrecorded, uncut, carried more weight than any panel could hold. Because that's what JD Vance never understood. He brought a label. She brought lineage. He brought dismissal. She brought dignity. And while he tried to reduce her to a stereotype, she reminded every girl watching that survival isn't something to be scrubbed off your resume. It's a skill set. It's heritage. It's armor. He thought the insult would shrink her. Instead, it made the country expand its definition of power. He thought the insult would shrink her. Instead, it made the country expand its definition of power. And that more than any trending clip, more than any panel fallout or corporate retraction, is the moment that mattered most. Not the word, not the backlash, not the speeches, or the think pieces, or the careful statements drafted by staffers trying to ride the fire out. No, it was the redefinition, the quiet recalibration of what it means to take up space without apology. Because Jasmine Crockett didn't just survive a moment, she claimed it, and then she restructured the room it happened in. So, when nearly 1 year later, the same network sent another panel invite, same setup, same studio, same glossy glass table, and yes, same co-panelist JD Vance. Her team hesitated. "You don't owe them anything," one advisor said. "You already made your point." But Jasmine didn't flinch, didn't pause, didn't even blink. "This isn't about him," she said. "It's about every girl still watching." And so, she went. She walked into that studio in a burnt orange suit, shoulders squared, edges sharp, presence undeniable, no ring light, no pre-fight hype, just her. Her hair pinned back just enough to show the gold studs in her ears. No armor needed, just memory. And when JD Vance looked over, you could feel it. He remembered, not just the line, not just the moment. He remembered that he had lost control of the room. The host opened soft, small talk, polite intros, a quick recap of the topic, national housing policy. But everyone watching knew what they were really here for. Not policy, history. The conversation began. Jasmine spoke first, clear, clinical, commanding. "We have 13 zip codes in Texas where the nearest full-service grocery store is over 5 miles away. You call it a zoning issue. I call it institutional neglect. We can't talk about mortgages while ignoring eviction cycles rooted in redlining." She wasn't emotional. She was undeniable. JD responded the only way he knew how, smug dismissal dressed as debate. "Well, Congresswoman, I'm sure your community cares, but I don't think turning this into an emotional issue helps anyone." There it was. Not ghetto, but the same code, polished, repackaged, safer, emotional, the soft bullet word, used when angry won't fly, when too black is too loud for daylight. He leaned back in his seat, confident again. But Jasmine, she didn't even look at him. She looked straight ahead, and answered not with heat, but with history. "You call it emotional," she said, "because you've never had to live next to a payday loan shop and a liquor store instead of a grocery store. You think it's emotional? I think it's lived experience." And this time, no one interrupted, no one blinked, because it wasn't just a rebuttal. It was echo. It was the return of a frequency that had never stopped ringing. JD leaned back, didn't reply, and for the first time, the audience watching didn't split along party lines. They nodded, in silence, together. Because what Jasmine Crockett did in that moment wasn't performance. It wasn't politics. It wasn't clapback culture. It was instruction, not just to JD, but to every woman walking into a room built to fold her down into politeness. To every girl told to watch her tone. To every leader asked to calm down when she speaks with weight. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She raised standards. The clip hit social media in under 10 minutes. But this time, it wasn't the words alone. It was her stillness, her breath, her refusal to let power shape her into its version of palatable. Later that night, back in her DC office, she sorted through her inbox. One message stood out. A father in Missouri. "My daughter watched your segment tonight." It said, "She told me she wants to be the kind of woman who speaks the way you do. Firm, calm, clear." She read it twice, because this was never about winning a fight with JD Vance. It was about rewriting the rules of the room. She didn't change the story with volume. She changed it with presence. And the next time someone watches a woman like Jasmine Crockett, unapologetic, unfiltered, and full of fire, and says to themselves, "She's being too much," they might stop. They might remember. Not the insult, not the headline, but the moment, the line, the silence, the truth that couldn't be rephrased, and they might finally understand. That's not too much. That's what real leadership looks like.